Welcome to Books Podcast. Ready for another deep dive? Today we're tackling 100 Years of Solitude. It's a book that often gets called like a cornerstone of magical realism. And we've got a pretty in-depth review to guide us through it. So let's try to unpack what makes this book so captivating and why it just keeps resonating with readers decades after it was published.
100 Years of Solitude kind of plunges us right into this saga of the Buendía family. They live in this fictional town called Macondo. And one of the fascinating things Garcia Marquez does is he uses this family story to reflect the broader kind of sweeping movements of Latin American history.
Yeah, the review I read, it mentioned how the family is almost trapped by fate. You see these names and personalities echoing across generations. Is that kind of what you mean by reflecting history?
Exactly. The Buenarias, they experience all these cycles of prosperity and then decline. And it really mirrors Latin America's own struggles with things like colonialism and political upheaval. It's not a direct allegory or anything, but there are these really powerful parallels. The arrival of the banana company in Macondo?
Ah, it reminds me of real life events.
Right.
Like the United Fruit Company.
Yeah.
And their impact on the region. Initially, they brought jobs and wealth. Eventually, it led to all that exploitation and unrest.
Precisely. Garcia Marquez really captures that complexity brilliantly. But I think what truly sets this book apart is how it uses magical realism.
Yeah.
All these fantastical events, they're woven into the story, but they're woven in so seamlessly that it feels completely natural.
Well, it's like those elements are just part of everyday life in Macondo. Rainstorms that last for years. Or a character ascending to heaven. It's wild.
Yeah.
But Garcia Marquez describes it all in such a matter-of-fact tone that you almost forget how bizarre it is.
Yeah, that's the beauty of his style. He presents the magical as totally ordinary, and it makes us question what we even consider real. It's like he's saying that life itself is full of these unexplainable wonders, and that embracing the fantastical can actually lead to a deeper understanding of the human experience.
Yeah, it makes me think about how those elements might actually make the story feel more realistic. They kind of reflect all the unexpected twists and turns that life throws at us.
That's a really brilliant insight. Now, one thing that really struck me is how solitude, even though it's right there in the title, isn't just about physical isolation. It's this much deeper emotional and existential state, and it affects all the characters.
Yeah, you really see it in the Buendía family members. They're constantly surrounded by family, yet they often struggle to connect on a deeper level. Each of them is kind of trapped in their own internal world.
That's such a crucial point. Even in a bustling town like Macondo, with all its activity and drama, there's this sense of profound loneliness that permeates the whole narrative. It's almost as though this solitude becomes a generational curse, haunting each new generation of the family. And that generational curse you were just talking about, it really comes through when you look at the individual characters. They're each so vividly drawn, with their own desires and their own struggles, but they also seem to repeat the mistakes of their ancestors.
The review mentioned a few characters that really stand out, like Colonel Aureliano Buendía. He starts as this fiery revolutionary, full of passion and idealism, but he ends up disillusioned.
Yeah.
Crafting and recrafting this little golden fish. It's almost like a symbol for that cyclical nature we were talking about earlier.
Absolutely. Aureliano's arc, it kind of embodies both the allure and the futility of certain ambitions. He's seeking meaning, he wants a purpose. But he ultimately finds himself trapped in this cycle of creation and destruction, and his solitude just deepens as he grows more and more disillusioned.
And then you have Ursula, the family matriarch. She's like this force of nature, the one who tries to hold everything together. But even she can't escape the pull of this generational curse.
Yeah, Ursula's resilience is remarkable, but her story also kind of highlights the limitations of individual strength. When you're up against larger forces, like fate and history, she sees all these repeated tragedies in her family, and it just adds another layer to the theme of solitude, the solitude of having to witness so much suffering that you can't prevent.
It's fascinating how even the characters who seem like the strongest are still touched by this sense of isolation. But maybe we can shift gears a bit and talk about some of the symbolism in the book. The review definitely mentioned it being layered throughout.
Oh, yeah. Garcia Marquez is a master of using symbols to add depth to the narrative. For example, those golden fish that Aureliano makes. They're more than just pretty objects. They represent this futile pursuit of something meaningful, which ultimately just melts away. It's a powerful commentary on the cyclical nature of life itself.
And I remember the review pointed out Macondo as a symbol, too. It's more than just a setting, right? Like it represents something larger.
Right. Macondo is like a microcosm of Latin America.
Hmm.
It reflects the region's history and its culture and all the social complexities, its founding and the periods of growth and decline, even its ultimate fate. They all parallel these broader historical currents that Garcia Marquez is exploring.
And all those ghosts that keep appearing, they seem to be everywhere in the book. What do you think they represent?
Well, the ghosts are this constant reminder of the past's hold on the present. They symbolize the weight of history and the ways in which previous generations continue to shape the lives of the living. It's like they embody this idea that we can never truly escape the legacies of those who came before us.
Like the past is always present, haunting the Buendias, influencing their choices, shaping their destinies.
Exactly. Now, shifting gears again, I wanted to talk about Garcia Marquez's writing style. It's one of the things that makes this book so mesmerizing.
Oh, absolutely. The review praised his lyrical prose and his ability to paint these vivid pictures of life in Macondo. I felt like I was transported there, experiencing the heat, the smells, the vibrant energy of the town.
His writing is both poetic and precise. He captures the beauty and the harsh realities of life in Macondo. He draws the reader into a world that feels both familiar and fantastical.
I did find his use of time jumps a little challenging at first, but I think ultimately they added to the richness of the whole experience. It's like he's weaving a tapestry with threads from different generations and different storylines all coming together to create this complex, multifaceted portrait of the family.
Yeah, the nonlinear structure. It's a deliberate choice that reflects those cyclical themes we were talking about. It challenges the reader to piece together the puzzle, to see how past events ripple through the present.
It's definitely a book that rewards multiple readings. Every time you go back to it, you discover new layers of meaning,
Yeah.
and you appreciate the craftsmanship of his storytelling even more. But before we wrap up, I'm curious what stands out to you the most from this deep dive.
For me, it's how Garcia Marquez captures that paradoxical nature of solitude. You know, his characters yearn for connection, but they're often trapped in their own internal worlds, unable to fully bridge the gap between themselves and others.
Yeah, I feel that that really resonates with me too. And it's interesting how solitude can manifest in different ways, like physical isolation or emotional detachment, even the solitude that comes with carrying the weight of history or witnessing the suffering of others.
Exactly, and I think that's what makes the book so powerful, despite its fantastical elements. 100 Years of Solitude speaks to these universal human experiences: love, loss, ambition, the search for meaning, and the enduring impact of the past.
Yeah. And the book also kind of challenges our assumptions about reality by blending the magical with the mundane. Garcia Marquez forces us to question what we perceive as real and to consider the possibility that there's more to the world than meets the eye.
It's almost as if the magical elements heighten the realism in a way by reflecting the unpredictable nature of life itself. Think about those unexpected twists of fate, those moments that defy logic or explanation. Perhaps magic is simply a way of acknowledging the mystery and wonder that exist all around us.
That's a beautiful way to put it, and it kind of circles back to what we were discussing earlier about how the book can feel both realistic and fantastical at the same time.
Precisely, 100 Years of Solitude invites us to embrace the complexity of life, to acknowledge the beauty and the sorrow, the magic and the mundane, all intertwined. It's a book that stays with you long after you finish reading it, prompting you to reflect on your own experiences, your own connections to the past, and your own search for meaning in a world that can often feel both wondrous and isolating.
It definitely leaves a lasting impression.
Yeah.
So to wrap up our deep dive, I'm curious, after exploring these themes and delving into the world of Macondo, do you think ultimately the magical elements make the story more realistic or less realistic?
That's the question, isn't it? And I think the answer is both. The magic might defy our logical understanding of the world, but it also reflects the unexpected turns that life can take, the moments that leave us speechless and wondering if we've stepped into a dream. Ultimately, it's up to each reader to decide how they interpret the interplay of realism and magic in the book.
And that's the beauty of literature, isn't it? It invites us to engage with the text, to draw our own conclusions, and to find personal meaning in the stories that resonate with us. So if you haven't already, I highly encourage you to pick up 100 Years of Solitude and embark on your own journey through Macondo. You might just discover a little magic along the way.
I couldn't agree more. It's a journey worth taking.
Thanks for listening to Books Podcast. Enjoy this episode? Subscribe and share with fellow book lovers. Got a book suggestion? Let us know. Happy reading.